This is Addiction Medicine Journal Club. I'm Dr. John Keenan.
And I'm Dr. Sonya Tredici.
We believe that addiction is a disease that can be treated, and we want to help you stay up to date with the latest research that you can use in your addiction medicine practice.
This is a special crossover episode with Dr. Casey Grover. He is the host of the Addiction Medicine Made Easy podcast, and we love his podcast, in which he breaks down a wide range of addiction medicine topics. He joined forces with us for a chat about Kratom. And if you like this episode, Casey will join us again for part 2, where we review some of the Kratom literature, Journal Club style.
Hello, friends. This is Dr. Casey Grover from the Addiction Medicine Made Easy podcast. And I am so excited to be doing this collaborative episode on Kratom with Drs. Sonya Tredici and John Keenan from the Addiction Medicine Journal Club. I am beyond excited, that's the geek in me talking, about today's episode, so let's dig in. Addiction Medicine Journal Club is one of my favorite podcasts. Sonya and John do an awesome job of reviewing recent articles in addiction medicine. And I've emailed with them a few times about various topics in addiction medicine, and we've shared some thoughts on articles as fellow addiction medicine geeks and doctors. But most recently, I reached out to them to see if we wanted to collaborate on a podcast episode, and we connected for a video conference and came up with so much to talk about. And we're probably, I hope we're going to be able to do more than one episode together. And the topic we picked for tonight was Kratom. So with that, Sonya and John, how are you both tonight as we get ready to discuss our experiences treating patients who use Kratom?
We are doing awesome. Well, I'll speak for myself, doing awesome. And Casey, thank you so much for reaching out. We're big fans of your podcast as well. And it's always fun to chat with other, addiction medicine nerds.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this episode, mostly because it's kind of just a fun conversation, a bunch of people kind of, like as you said, geeking out about shared interests. So it's kind of a nice change of pace for us, although I do love our other format too.
Yeah. So let's just level set as we get started, a little bit of background on Kratom. So Kratom refers to a tree-like herb that grows naturally in the southeastern Asia-Pacific region. And the scientific name, and I had to look up the pronunciation, is Mitragyna speciosa. Kratom has both stimulant and opioid-like properties. There are multiple traditional medical uses for Kratom, including pain relief and to stave off fatigue. It has also been used recreationally for euphoric effects. And in America's modern era of problems with opioids, many people use it to manage opioid dependence and withdrawal. It affects multiple receptors in the body. It's an agonist at the mu and kappa opioid receptors, and it actually also may inhibit the cyclooxygenase enzyme to produce an anti-inflammatory effect, and at lower doses, it has some mild stimulant properties. So, I actually can say I was in clinic today, and I talked to several of my patients about Kratom, so I'm excited to see how this conversation goes. So, Sonya and John, in your practice, how are patients presenting to you when they are using Kratom? Are they coming and saying, I need help with Kratom? Does it come up later? What are y'all seeing?
I'm seeing patients say they need help with Kratom. I haven't had a lot of people admit to using it when I ask, do you use other drugs? People have kind of kept that under wraps. So I've only seen people who are specifically coming for help with this, with this herbal product, with this addiction. How about you, John?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've kind of into my clinical practice, more so my general family medicine practice, have gotten in the habit of asking patients, besides your medication list, are there any herbs or supplements? I think most of our patients don't view this necessarily as kind of a drug per se, like our classic sense. So I have had a couple patients kind of endorse using it. It's interesting. It's often kind of my patients with a previous history of substance use disorder are now using it kind of without any other medication assistance to treat symptoms that they kind of attribute to their diseases.
I think patients are bringing it to us, but I'm surprised we haven't seen more of it. I really think the scientific and medical community is way behind on this. I feel like I've barely heard of it. I asked a bunch of people if they've heard of it. I was searching for a botanist who could talk to me about it, and I know apparently a lot of botanists, and none of them have even heard of it. And yet Tobacco Hut, 2 blocks from my house, has, a Kratom sign with, 24-inch high letters out there. Like, it's a huge product, and I feel like there's so little publicity about it. It's not really underground, but it's very kind of unknown. And so I think doctors don't know to ask about it. I certainly didn't know to ask about it till relatively recently, but I'm going to have to be, I think. I think it's important to start asking because you can just buy it over the counter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have kind of started to ask about it, and it seems to be like well known in my addiction medicine clinic. It seems to be relatively unknown in kind of my general practice clinic. So I think it seems to certainly have a demographic that it appeals to and is marketing towards.
Yeah, my experience has been I've had a few patients come to me and say, I'm using Kratom, help me stop. And I've had a few patients that we were treating for an unrelated substance like methamphetamine, and then they go into opioid withdrawal and call for help. And then I have to dig in deeper. My experience has also been with yours, that if people don't specifically come to me saying, I need help with Kratom, they don't think to bring it up. So actually, I'm very grateful. Our urine drug test, we now add mitragyna. That's the way the lab tests for it. So I'm now screening most of my patients to see if they're using Kratom and just don't think to bring it up.
Now, this brings up an interesting point, guys. If we're doing, say, a buprenorphine initiation, we're telling people to abstain from opioids for, 24 hours, go into withdrawal, start the medicine. Could you send someone into precipitated withdrawal if they've been using Kratom? Like, let's say we're starting buprenorphine. They don't think they're using any opiates, but they don't tell us about the Kratom, and we precipitate withdrawal from that. Would that be possible?
That's an interesting question, theoretically. I will tell you, in clinical practice, my 3 inductions for this substance, I started it relatively quickly, and I didn't encounter that. So take that N of 3 and do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience. People, when they reach out, I'm in withdrawal, what do I do? Oh, I didn't know you were using Kratom. I will start them on buprenorphine relatively quickly, the way we did for heroin, and it's worked relatively well. I don't know if there's a lot of literature on this. And I feel like the two kind of phenotypes of patients I see are the one says, I'm using Kratom, help me. And I just told them to wait, 12 hours and then start. Or I didn't know Kratom was an opioid. Why am I feeling so bad? And then we started. So I suppose, though, since it does have opioid agonism, if someone's using Kratom and you're starting buprenorphine, say for pain, not aware that they're opioid dependent, you could.
Yeah, that's what I'd worry about. But I don't know if the opioid agonism it seems relatively weak comparatively. So the people we see getting into trouble, I don't know about you guys, but they're using such massive amounts. It's much more than you would, I won't say what's on the label because there's no instructions on the label of these products, but, they know they're using 10, 20, 30, whatever bottles a day. And so they know they have a problem. I wonder if the person who's using just 1 bottle, 2 bottles a day if there's enough opioid agonism to worry about precipitated withdrawal. I don't know, though. Anyone want to do a study out there? Please let us know.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be there soon.
Case report?
Yeah. So let's segue and kind of talk about Kratom withdrawal specifically. So from what your patients are telling you, how does Kratom withdrawal compare to opioid withdrawal? And are you seeing any unique symptoms with Kratom withdrawal that you don't see as much with opioid withdrawal? That's
a great question. I mean, I'll answer first. I feel like the few patients I've had with this, they're patients that have a history of opioid use disorder, like I talked about. They've transitioned to this after a period of medication assistance for kind of treatment. And actually what happens is it's sort of like the mirtazapine of drugs, right? It has like the stimulant-like effect at lower doses. As if you raise up, you get more of an opioid-like effect. And so by the time they present it to me, you're right, it's like 15, 20 vials a day. They're doing very large amounts. And when they presented using that degree, it really is kind of more of a pure mu-opioid type effect. So they kind of present a lot like my classic kind of opioid withdrawal patients, at least the ones I've seen.
Yeah, I just don't have as many patients, so I don't know if I can give you like a general sense of how it is. But from the few patients that I've treated, a lot of it's just been cravings. It's almost like nicotine withdrawal. Like it's right there. You could buy it anytime. You have to force yourself not to, and you just crave it. And then also like agitation, anxiety, insomnia. I haven't seen the true opioid withdrawal with like diarrhea, the more physical diarrhea, vomiting, fevers, shaking. But again, I haven't had a ton of patients. What about you, Casey?
Yeah, I had one yesterday, and he's been on buprenorphine for probably 6-8 months. And he actually commented that he felt that Kratom withdrawal was worse than opioid withdrawal. Now, as I say to my patients all the time, this is not science, this is anecdote. And the plural of anecdote is not data. But I did have one patient, and I let him know I'm researching more about Kratom, and he goes, man, that withdrawal was awful. And then my other patient said the buprenorphine withdrawal was worse than Kratom withdrawal. The only thing I think I might notice a little bit different is maybe there's some more mood symptoms, simply because Kratom does have some stimulant effects. And a lot of my patients, when they talk about stimulant withdrawal, are just really dysphoric.
Mm-hmm.
The one other thing that I thought was interesting was just that, some of my patients couldn't really identify what was happening. They didn't know that kratom was an opioid. So they talked about symptoms and they didn't know what they were. And then ultimately we went back and I identified them as opioid withdrawal. And kind of the milder symptom was just kind of like a vague sense of malaise or like just kind of restlessness, which would probably be consistent with mild opiate withdrawal. So I think for the most part, I've seen kratom withdrawal and opiate withdrawal look pretty similar.
Casey,
Yeah,
it sounds
and
like you got more experience with this. Like, do you have a high volume of patients you're seeing? I know you're kind of West Coast, we're kind of East Coast.
Yeah, so I'm in the central coast of California. I think I have maybe 6.
Okay.
And then I've over the years, I've had some personal friends who've lived with addiction that have talked about kratom. But yeah, I've also, with all of you, started to learn more about kratom. It's interesting. I had some of my kratom using patients in the last 2 weeks, so I kind of peppered them with questions, knowing that we were going to talk about this.
Yeah, that's funny.
the only thing I can add to this about withdrawal, I mean, I had looked at some of the literature and people are starting to put out, case series and kind of information from real life practice about kratom. And just like you said, Casey, the big symptoms were more mood, anxiety, agitation, insomnia, cravings, rather than the more physical symptoms from sort of high dose, fentanyl, heroin withdrawal.
Yeah, I've wondered that too. Like, as I've seen very few of these. Is it kind of more objective signs of withdrawal or subjective? I think many patients with kind of a history of substance use, they report kind of withdrawal oftentimes to many different dysphoric feelings that aren't necessarily kind of substance related. And, I know this is still a hot topic. I kind of wonder too if just the partial opioid agonist activity of it is more of a triggering feeling to them than anything else. It's just an interesting new product on the market.
Yeah, one comment I want to make about that is my addiction practice is linked with a pain clinic. So the clinic is probably 95% pain medicine, and then there's 2 addiction doctors. And what's amazing is the pain patients flip-flop between methadone and buprenorphine like it ain't no thing. And I would ask them, like, how did you do this? Because, I was always taught in addiction medicine, it's very difficult to go back and forth. And essentially, they don't fear withdrawal. And I've often wondered how much of precipitated withdrawal is fear and anxiety. And when a lot of times people have really been panicking, I'm in withdrawal, it's really the anxiety. So, withdrawal is so nuanced. And what I learned to do in the emergency department was ask, okay, you're in withdrawal. What specific symptom are you dealing with? And most often it was anxiety. So it's kind of the fear of withdrawal, I think, is an issue we face a lot in addiction medicine, and kind of the fear of getting on Suboxone for that reason. But certainly, my small number of kratom patients have mentioned that their withdrawal was similar to opiate withdrawal, but again, a lot of those mood symptoms. So let's go another direction here. And again, maybe I have a head start because I knew we were going to do this and had 2 kratom patients in the last 2 weeks. But what are you hearing as to why people go find kratom? What are you hearing as to the reasons why kratom is what they seek out?
Anxiety. That's what my people were looking for. Anxiety relief.
No, I actually reached out to my patients that I'm treating for this. I didn't have no office visit with them. I just called them and said, it's Dr. Keenan. Do you have 5 minutes to chat about something? I asked them this specific question. And the 3 that I'm treating actively, they all said the same thing, that basically they felt kind of run down, tired, fatigued after getting off of kind of their opioid agonist treatment. And they thought this was kind of like a way to transition to a new form of treatment. And so I think we often hear that, like, people that say they're feeling withdrawal because they're feeling achy, they're feeling tired. So I think they were trying to fill something in their life that they thought was missing without kind of another substance.
Well, and it's, you'd hope patients would come to us and ask for help for that sort of continuing sort of long post-withdrawal syndrome you get when your brain is trying to heal from the opioids. But it just made me think, Casey, I did a little field trip to the Kratom store just to talk to the owner and see what his experience was. And he, the experience is just very different. As a patient, you can walk in, it's very nice. You can purchase whatever you want in whatever amount. If you don't like it, you can go back the next day and try something else. As opposed to us, we're much more like, you have to come at this time. And if you don't like it, you can't come back till next month and you can't get an early refill. And there's only 3 choices and your insurance doesn't even cover 2 of them. So you have to get this one. And so I do understand patients' desire to have that more kind of retail experience where they're more in control of it, and try something on their own. But yeah, I don't think people know what they're getting into, you know?
Yeah, I have to say, I did not realize that part of it, of just the freedom, I think, to be a consumer rather than a patient. I think that's really insightful. I actually miscounted. I've had three patients with Kratom in the last 2 weeks. So one of them, he's a painter, and he was just tired. He's like his mid-50s and feels like he's losing his pep. And one of his friends was like, "Hey, there's this Kratom stuff. It gives you energy." And so he was using it regularly, and then went into horrible withdrawal and didn't know what was going on. Another patient of mine found it for pain. He sounds like he was kind of Googling pain treatments and specifically found Kratom, not from any of the manufacturers, because Sonya and I could talk about both of our experiences buying Kratom. But he basically found that, you can treat your own pain with Kratom. And then the third I saw today, and she has issues with both feeling like she needs energy and then also having pain. So she's a chronic pain patient. She's now on buprenorphine because of opiate dependence from Kratom and pain. And then she said to me, she's like, "I just can't get going. I have no energy. I need to be on a stimulant." In our practice, we don't prescribe stimulants for stimulant addiction, just from a regulatory standpoint. But I thought that was really interesting that she's like, "I need to be up." And it sounds like the Kratom was for her a really good combo because it was pain relief and a mood lift.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good combo until you try to stop it.
Well, I mean, how many of our patients feel too down with the opiates so they use stimulants to bring them up?
It seems like the way when I was like reading about this beforehand, everyone's marketing about like, yeah, they think sharper, they have more energy, they have like less pain. It almost feels like, not to open another can of worms, similar to kind of like the preoccupation with like testosterone. It's the same kind of vague, non-specific symptoms. And I'm reading about that. I'm like, gosh, I would like to have more energy and I would like to think clearer. And I don't want pain after like I go for a run. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, stop. This is research. What am I talking about?
Right. Maybe you should come with me to Tobacco Hut.
It was
next
very
time.
well, like the way that it's articulated, like it's natural. It will help you get energy. Like it really feels like a Trojan horse, right? The way it's kind of marketed and the way people talk about it.
Right. Well, and this isn't necessarily like we're going way off topic here, Casey. Sorry, I know you brought questions, but we're not going to answer them. We're going to say what we want to say instead. Maybe I'm being inspired by the presidential election. But anyway, a lot of these products in their original botanical form are pretty benign. Like I think Kratom tea, I think there were some cultural problems with it, and there were complaints even in countries that were using it just in its traditional form, that it was being misused and affecting the country's youth. And, people were complaining about it, but it was nothing like we see here because we've taken that natural form and concentrated it and allowed it to be, sold and taken in high doses. I was asking the guy at my store about tea, and he said, no one makes a tea of it anymore. And if you have to drink it as a tea, there's only so much tea you can drink before like your stomach is full and you just can't drink any more tea, or you start to pee the tea out. It slows your consumption. Whereas in the US, we don't want to, we've concentrated it and it's super high dose in these powdered forms sold in capsules or tinctures. And so the effects, I think the traditional use of it probably isn't terrible. 1 cup of Kratom tea a day, maybe that's not so terrible. I don't know. But we're not using it that way anymore.
Well, but I think that goes back to drugs in general. I mean, think about cannabis is traditionally 1% THC, and like seedless watermelons, through, farming practices, we've now bred 30% THC cannabis. The coca leaf is relatively weak, but we process it into crack cocaine. Sugar cane is, if you ever had it, is like, my dad said it was like sucking sugar water out of balsa wood. He was right. And now we have granulated sugar. I mean, I think that's the natural evolution of how humans use things. But I was going to say, maybe I'm jumping out of line here, but I was going to read some of the things that the Kratom strains that I browsed were purported to be able to do. So there's the amplifying go mode slump buster. That's the white Mung Da strain. There's the bolstered outlook energizing well-being strain. That's super green.
Super green.
energizing daytime well-being elevator. That sounds great. Like you said, I need an energy boost and a well-being elevator. And that's the Plantation Mang Da strain. So they actually, I mean, to your point, like I'm tired all the time. I get up at 5 a.m. every morning and I'm always working on stuff. I can see how somebody who doesn't know what this is can easily say, I want to be more productive. I want to be a better parent. I want to be more present for my spouse. This sounds great.
Right. Did your store sell the brand Trainwreck?
Oh no, that sounds great. There were no train wrecks in my store.
So it's funny.
Oh man.
So let's come back a little more clinical here. So, and granted, none of us have a huge amount of experience with these folks, but the patient comes to you and says, I need help with Kratom. I'm using it to manage my depression. I'm using it to manage my pain. They clearly have a reason why they're using it. Talk me through how you're going to start that conversation with the patient and understand what your next steps are going to be.
Right. I mean, the first step would just be education, that this is an opioid and we have to manage, withdrawal and cravings and staying off it the same way we'd manage opioid withdrawal. I think that's the first revelation for people. It's like an opioid. And then there's only case reports in the literature. I would just treat it like an opioid, buprenorphine and withdrawal management with adjunct medications. That's all I got.
I think I want to understand like what mood symptoms and what pain they're feeling, right? So I think that kind of mood symptoms is a little more difficult because it can kind of be vague. And certainly I think we can go off topic about some kind of the opioid agonist having like a antidepressant type effect. And I think that's going to be at our grand rounds coming up. But certainly the chronic pain part of it, I think, is really important to understand, especially, we know that kind of chronic opioid exposure in any form does cause hyperalgesia. So like, I think it's really a good teachable moment for people that kind of like, that's not really a great long-term pain option for them. And so I think a lot of times if you come at it from a point of like curiosity, like, tell me what's going on. Why do you feel this way? What are you trying to treat? I do think people are a little more receptive to that than kind of like Dr. Keenan lecturing them about, this is not good for them. And I think I've made more segue with that approach. Now, like, as I said, not all the time you're going to win that conversation, but it's a long-term relationship, right? You want to keep in the game.
Yeah, I feel like the best question I ask when I'm in clinic is, what does this substance do for you? There was a great article on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I covered it on my podcast, where it was like, what do people with cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome experience when they go to the emergency department? They usually get told, stop cannabis, but aren't instructed how to do so. And no one asks them why they use cannabis and what that unmet need that cannabis is brought in to try to help is. So I usually ask people, like, what does meth do for you? What does heroin do for you? And then I work backwards to say, okay, well, these are the issues. These are the prescriptions that I can substitute. So I've actually been trying a lot of the non-stimulant ADHD meds for people who use stimulants, because a lot of them say, gosh, I'm just so much calmer on meth. And for years in the ER, I'd be like, you're lying. That's not true. Meth is an upper, but there's a certain subset who have unmanaged ADHD and have had some good luck with some of the ADHD medications. So I think I'd want to explore with them how they found it, why they use it, what it does for them, kind of try to make a problem list. Is there depression? Is there unmanaged ADHD? Is there pain? And then try to come up with a list of medications that I can substitute.
So here's an interesting question for you guys, because so little is known about Kratom that we know it can be addictive, and the negative impact of the addiction is unknown as far as physical health goes. But mostly my patients, it's just financial. They don't like having a habit and it's super expensive. But because it's legal, it doesn't sort of destroy your life the way that being addicted to an illegal drug can. So what if someone was addicted the way we're all probably addicted to our coffee, but the use was manageable? Use it every day. It's your morning pick-me-up. If you don't have it, you might feel kind of sick. Is that a bad thing if it works for you?
I mean, just like alcohol?
Just like alcohol, just like caffeine.
So this actually brings up one of the questions I wanted to ask, which I think is going to be a really interesting conversation for the three of us. So I've been on LinkedIn, that's my only social media, and I've been posting some of the stuff I've been learning about Kratom. And the Kratom people, and I actually have a call, I think, with the World Kratom Alliance or the World Kratom Federation tomorrow. They really believe it's harm reduction. They genuinely believe that lives are saved by Kratom because they're not using fentanyl. And there's an interesting point there. And I had one of my patients who used Kratom and then went to buprenorphine, and I think he'd been on stronger opioids previously. And then I shared some case reports of heroin going to Kratom, going to buprenorphine. And the response I got was, that's a win for Kratom and a win for buprenorphine. And I went, that's an interesting perspective. So what role, if any, does Kratom play in harm reduction strategies for opioid users? And how can we incorporate that into conversations with our patients? This goes back to your question, Sonya. If someone's using a little bit of Kratom and they're not using fentanyl, what should we do with that?
Right. And I don't think it's known, like, there isn't data showing negative health effects beyond the sort of addiction with, sort of low level Kratom use. It's just not there. And I can't imagine there is a lot of negative health effects to it. It's not smoked. People take it as a capsule or a tea. And I mean, that's what the owner of the tobacco hut, if he's listening, hi there, said that he would recommend it for people who are trying to get off street drugs, trying to get off opioids. That's his recommendation if someone were to approach him for what could they try. And it can't be worse than using illicit fentanyl, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I said the answer is never, like always or never, right? So I can tell you, like, one of the three people I have, harm reduction is kind of it's a sliding scale, right? It changes based upon kind of level of risk of the person. And like, I can tell you, one of the three people I take care of, they were homeless. They were using methamphetamines. They were using fentanyl multiple times per day. They got a job. They were using Kratom. And then they eventually came to me with an issue with the Kratom. But in the meantime, they switched from homeless using meth and using heroin to kind of working with Kratom, had a job, had a house. I would consider that a success. I know we're not like going to be Kratom cheerleaders here, but that was a win for harm reduction.
Well, and it's legal. So much of the negative effects of drugs is because they're illegal, not because of the drug themselves. So having a legal substitute is huge in terms of helping people get their lives back. I mean, Casey, the three of us, all told, we don't have a ton of experience with Kratom, but, I did read some data and it said about 16% of Kratom users used it as an opioid substitute, like to get off other opioids. So 84% are using it for something else, but there's a small segment who are using it to get off opioids. And there's, it seems to be implicated in a lot of overdoses, like it's present, but not a ton that's Kratom alone. Seems relatively safe. It just can't be worse. Like John said, it's a sliding scale. There's also people who reported using it as an alcohol substitute, and again, maybe safer, better for your body than alcohol. I don't know.
So I'm looking at my notes from a previous podcast on Kratom, and it looks like Kratom has drug-drug interactions with the CYP cytochrome P450 system. So apparently Kratom is metabolized by the CYP3A4 isoform. So you can actually get some drug-drug interactions. Apparently ketamine is on the list of things that Kratom interacts with. The other things I found were predominantly from case reports. Kratom can cause a transaminitis, hypothyroidism, hypogonadism, that's probably the opioid in it. There's some cases of cardiotoxicity, kidney injury, and then babies born to mothers using Kratom can have neonatal abstinence. So it's probably relatively similar to other opioids. I think the other thing, though, is it's unregulated. And supplements are such a mess. I'm going to call out a particular senator, Orrin Hatch in Utah, who facilitated whatever supplement act in the 90s allowed supplements to be completely unregulated. I mean, you can literally go to like GNC and buy a supplement and it contains 0 of the active ingredient listed. I mean, there was a study that looked at some various brands and purity, and supplements are it's really unfortunate how unregulated they are. So that being said, I mean, I think if someone's actually getting Kratom, it's not an excessive dose. It's not causing life consequences. What would I say? How about Bupe? And then how about like Bupe and a non-addictive ADHD med? But if someone came to me and were willing to engage with me, and like I would see them regularly, and now I can run meet-your-guida levels in my office, so I could see if their use is escalating. I'm open to almost work with anybody if they have a reasonable suggestion, and I'd be open to somebody who said this actually works best for me. I'm worried I'm going to have a problem with it. Can I see you every month, and we'll do your drug screens to make sure I'm not my drug levels in my urine aren't escalating. I'd be nervous just because it is unregulated, and I think the Kratom people that I've talked to on LinkedIn really just want better regulations, so they find it's helpful. There's as many as apparently 15 million users in the US. So if we make it illegal, what do those people do? I don't know. It's an interesting question ethically as to what we should do in terms of a harm reduction perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think harm reduction is just meeting people where they're at. If people want to use Kratom, I tell patients, I'm not going to come to your house and like take your whatever it is away from you. I'm just here to help. And if it's really working for someone and they're not experiencing any negative side effects and use isn't escalating, that's fine. I mean, it's an unregulated product. It could contain anything. There's no dosing. I mean, at my store, you can buy it by the kilo of powdered leaf in kilo bags, and there's no instructions, and there's no guarantee of purity, and there's no guarantee of potency. It's a botanical product, and so potency varies based on season, age of the plant, leaf harvesting techniques, drying techniques. All those things will affect the potency as well. And so you don't know what you're getting. It's not a pharmaceutical. It's different. It's the brand that I was looking at, there's a big warning. The only warning on it says consult your healthcare professional to determine if Kratom is right for you.
Most physicians will say, I have no idea what that is.
I don't think it's right. And also says don't use it if you're pregnant. Those are the two warnings.
That's nice.
Yeah, I know, right?
Sure was nice of them.
Yeah, let's pivot. So I actually, after one of my patients told me that, hey, I had no idea Kratom was an opioid. I was just using it to be more productive at work. I went into a smoke shop and browsed and looked and asked questions. And Sonya, you did the same. We should probably talk about like what it actually looks like when you walk into a store to buy it, and kind of what maybe a better way it could be presented to consumers would be.
Right. I mean, I'm just struck with the difference between the retail experience and the medical experience. I mean, my patients use the phrase on papers often to mean when they're under the thumb of the legal system in some way, on parole, on probation, they're on papers. And going to the doctor kind of feels like you're on papers. Someone else is controlling you. And I think that's why a lot of my patients almost prefer to buy buprenorphine illicitly. So they just have more control. They don't have to report back to any annoying authority figure. And I think buying your own Kratom at the store is like that. You can choose what you want and nobody is on your case about it. And the whole experience is set up to please you because you're a customer. The store looks nice. It's well lit. It smells nice. It's the salespeople are all super nice. It's just a very different experience buying it at the store. And that really strikes me and makes me feel bad for my patients and what we put them through to try to get treatment. But no, it was, in the store I went to, there was just a giant wall of Kratom products, a huge wall of different, extracts, tinctures, capsules, raw powder, so much.
Yeah, I think about the other thing to your point is just how fast it is in and out. I mean, I was nosy and asked a bunch of questions. I browsed a bunch of different products. I took some photos. I was in and out of there in less than 5 minutes. And I was thinking about it. You go to the doctor, right? You got to take time out of your workday. You have to wait because most of us are always behind. Then you have to get the prescription. Then you have to go to the pharmacy. The pharmacist gives you attitude about being on buprenorphine. And then the pharmacy's out. There's all these other hurdles in the medical system. And Sonya, your point is so good. You walk in, you walk out, you're a consumer. They say thank you, and off you go. That makes total sense to me.
Yeah. So maybe we need to be a little bit more like Tobacco Hut.
So actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I do work in a street clinic. Well, I used to. I got too busy. But we literally would see them and have the meds delivered. So they would walk up. It was just a walk-up low-barrier buprenorphine clinic. They'd walk up on a Friday. We'd have the meds delivered, and they'd walk back up on Monday and get it. So that actually worked pretty well. But that's a very atypical medical setting. That was like in our homeless encampment. We drove a van in and just put me at a table for buprenorphine. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm imagining now a wall. I've got buprenorphine mono product. I've got Suboxone films. I got Suboxone tablets, 2 or 3 different manufacturers. I've got meds for withdrawals. They're all up on the wall in packages. You can choose your own dose. Then you come chat with me. I could tell you what I recommend. You make your purchase. However
You get a
many
baseball
you want.
cap with your face on it.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, the outcomes in terms of what people would get honestly wouldn't be super different because now, I pretty much give people whatever they say works the best for them in terms of dose and formulation. So
Yeah, I'm the same way with bupe.
Is that funny how you change with that over time? You're like, okay, this works for you. I'm cool.
yeah. I know.
Well, I mean, at least for us in California, I mean, fentanyl has just changed everything. I'm assuming it's the same there. We just detected hexanoyl fentanyl in our drug supply, whatever that is. Our in-office urine drug testing detects, I think, furanol fentanyl, acryl fentanyl, acetyl fentanyl, and parafluorofentanyl. So I'm starting to see those hit positive for my patients. So quite honestly, if somebody doesn't want bube and they're willing to engage with me and use Kratom and submit to regular drug testing so I can make sure they're okay, I'd be open to it as long as they were engaged and working with me to make sure that, they're not seeing escalating use. Because, fentanyl has just been like the biggest disaster. This is so funny, and I think you guys can relate to this. I miss heroin. Oh my gosh, can we bring heroin back? It was so much easier to treat. And, if this is an alternative for people who are trying to get off of fentanyl and they're not interested in traditional medicine, you know what? At least it's not fentanyl.
At least it's not fentanyl. Is that going to be our tagline? Kratom, at least it's not fentanyl. That's the name of this episode.
I think it's got to be.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, that's the name.
So I'm about to run off to do CrossFit with my patients, which is so fun. So let's wrap up. Let's each of us maybe give like a take-home message that we have from what we've learned from learning about this topic.
All right, my take-home message is that doctors don't know enough about this. We've got to ask about it. It is addictive. It's potentially harmful. Patients are not educated appropriately about the product, so we need to ask about it and at least give people some real information if they are taking it.
I think my takeaway from the topic is that I think when people are transitioning out of care or off of medications to help, I think that kind of maybe some pre-counseling and discussions regarding what their thoughts are, not only about like a relapse prevention plan, but do they have other alternative ways they think they're going to be addressing their opioid use disorder and kind of engaging them to see what they're thinking.
Yeah, I think my take home is that I didn't realize that people viewed Kratom as a harm reduction technique. I had viewed it essentially as just another opioid. And the people that believe in Kratom really believe that it's a safer, better alternative to either pharmaceutical opioids or illicit opioids. So that was definitely new information for me. All right, y'all. And with that, this concludes our first collaborative episode where the Addiction Medicine Journal Club and the Addiction Medicine Made Easy podcasts joined forces to take on a topic. And as I said at the beginning, we are hopefully going to do another one on this same topic in the future that's much more evidence-based. So with that,
yes,
John,
not hopefully. We are going to do an episode in the future where we talk about some research about Kratom, because it's not all just Wild West, opinions and visiting the Kratom store. There is actual data and research on this, which we would be excited to present to you.
Yeah.
Although this was fun. I felt like this was kind of like just like hanging out with friends, chatting about something interesting. I don't feel like I get that many kind of people in my circle that have this type of meaningful conversation about topics I care about. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, Casey, for setting this up.
Yeah, this is fun. Can't wait for the next episode.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Addiction Medicine Journal Club. The best part of any journal club is the conversation, and we want to hear what you have to say. To have your thoughts about Kratom included in a future episode, send us your comments on social media, email, or join our Facebook group. The links are in the show notes.
Original theme music was composed and performed by Benjamin Kennedy, audio editing by Michael Bonanno, produced by Dr. Patrick Beeman and Ars Longa Media. Addiction Medicine Journal Club is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. The views expressed here are our own and do not necessarily reflect those of our employers or the authors of the articles that we review. All patient information has been modified to protect their identities. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Have a great day.